Apparently the second half of Season 7 seemed to be really building up to something for the season finale. With the introduction of characters featured in the comics and all of them having some spiritual connection to the main six, it seemed like a real big event was going to occur in the finale. Of course now, I've learned to not always overhype something and I openly but still cautiously awaited the episode. And when it finally aired, well, it's better than some other episodes that occurred this season, but Shadowplay seems to be lacking that grand feel that we usually get from two-parters. It doesn't make the episode bad, but it still leaves a lot to be desired, and unfortunately it has several writing issues. Sunburst reveals the secrets of a book he found in that mystery barrel he bought in last week's episode, discovering that it was actually an old journal left behind by Starswirl. Huh, what are the odds? Going through the journal, our heroes learn that Starswirl and 5 other ponies once came together to defeat an ancient evil, becoming the Pillars of Equestria in the process. The group sets out to activate a spell to bring them back by gathering items that personally belong to them. They successfully bring the Pillars back, but little do they know that this would also bring back the ancient evil known as the Pony of Shadows. Wait, you mean that name that was briefly mentioned back in Season 4? Wow, that's actually pretty clever writing. Anyway, the team must now find a way to stop this Pony of Shadows before he takes over all of Equestria. But the map shows them that this problem might have more of a story to it than they previously suspected. I never thought I'd say this about an episode, but I'm afraid that there's way too much world building in this storyline. Not only is there a lot of stuff being introduced to us, but because of the oversaturation of it all, there's hardly any time put into giving each thing a specific background. I mean, you got the pillars, these ancient artifacts, more spells that are just made up on the spot, a parallel dimension known as Limbo, the origin of the Tree of Harmony, the Pony of Shadows, the return of Starswirl the Bearded, and all of it is just put together loosely in a 40-minute story arc. The main issue with this is that it's all supposed to play an important part in the story, and yet it's all given to us in a way that just goes over our heads. The world-building aspects were better in the movie because it was more of a background element. They weren't essential to the narrative except for the sea ponies, so things like new locations and new species were things that we could appreciate while still enjoying the story. But in this episode, all of the world-building stuff is in the foreground. It's all connected together for this story, and most if not all of it is given very vague insight. For example, because of this episode, the entire concept of the Tree of Harmony has now become very confusing. I was interested at first because they were building it up as this mystical force of nature, something mysterious that was giving subtle clues and hints to its identity. It had enough consciousness and awareness to reward each of the main 6 for passing tests that resemble the elements, and then gave them a giant castle complete with a map that tells them where to solve problems in Equestria. The tree could have been like a spirit of some sort, a living being with a secret history that could date back to ancient times as a guardian of life on the planet. That's why it was able to do away with Discord seeds after the elements were returned. But nope, it was just some seed that the pillars planted in the middle of nowhere. And all of this is leading me to ask, what kind of seed was this? Were there other seeds like it? Did Starswirl and the pillars place magic into it? And if so, how would this magic result in a tree with some state of consciousness that produces a castle and a map with a state of consciousness? It couldn't have been the secret consciousness of the pillars because they were shown to be unaware of all the events that took place in the time that they were gone. And did this seed also have the vague ability to turn random objects into keys? And hold on, is that supposed to be a 7th element of harmony, the green leaves sprouting from the seed? If that's what they're planning, it would be extremely awkward to introduce a 7th element this late into the franchise, especially after the elements haven't been relevant for the last 4 seasons. And if they didn't mean for it to be an element, why did they put it in there at all? I know it's just me at the moment, but a lot of other people could take it the wrong way. The story itself is also missing that really grand scale feeling for an event that's supposed to be such a big change for the series, and it could be because the episode's pacing feels really jumbled half the time. I mean, the first part has a steady feel to it, but the second part feels like it's going really fast. There's plenty of backstory and character introduced in the second half, and it tries to get them to all fit together along with this side story about Starlight's feelings on Starswirl's lack of good judgment. The vast amount of content ends up getting crowded and shoved together, and it makes the story feel less epic and somewhat mediocre. I do admire the episode using a new piece of lore to tell a story, but the way it's done here feels like it was given very poor direction. Even the first part, which is mostly paced well, ends up feeling rushed during the third act because it spends too much time on retrieving Dash's artifact. And that's actually another thing that the movie did better than this episode. It seemed to understand the concept of less is more. The length of the film allowed the story to feel less crowded while having the freedom to introduce new concepts. And not too much is introduced at one time that it doesn't get in the way of Twilight's or Tempest's tale. This episode has way too much going on, and it ends up taking away from the impact it's trying to make. Aside from that, there's some other small things that just kind of get in the way, and one of them is a really big problem for this story. Firstly, they really harp on reminding us about Starlight's past even when it's not needed. I guess they want to build some turmoil between her and Starswirl, but it gets really overused. It would have been more fitting and subtle if they did it just once, and it would have segued a lot better into the side story with her and Starswirl. But because they keep foaming it in, it feels really forced. And this might be a small thing, but I really don't get why Starlight would know Old Ponish if the previous episode had just established that she was uninterested in equestrian history. Even if she was, there was never any indication that she had experience with the language, so it feels like something that just comes out of nowhere. But the biggest problem with the episode by far is the plot hole that's established at the very end. Why the hell didn't the Pillars just ask Stygian why he took the artifacts? I mean, he does take them without permission, but they don't bother to ask him what his motivation was. They were really willing to just give up on him in an instant. I'm pretty sure if they gave him a chance to explain himself, they wouldn't have been so harsh. What makes this such an issue is that it makes the whole mess look like a misunderstanding that could have easily been avoided. If anything, the Pillars are kind of idiots for their poor lack of judgment, which drove their friend away and had him running into a dark spirit that warped his mind. Even the way it looks just makes it seem like they did it just to make Starswirl in the wrong in front of Starlight. I mean, for the guy who educated the Royal Sisters and was known to be the most powerful and talented wizard of his time, he is a very stubborn moron. I remember his character being much more interesting in the comics. He was a strict teacher, but he also felt more reasonable, and he had more of a reason to be strict with Celestia. On top of that, he was actually more like the mentor he was built up to be, lending support and giving advice when needed. He also had a fun-loving and highly curious side to him, which gave his character a cheerful sense of energy. To see Starswirl as this really one-note grouch and so highly stubborn makes it really hard to believe that he had anything to do with Celestia, or even have the leadership skills to guide the Pillars. So yeah, this two-parter has a lot of problems and it really looks like it fell flat, especially compared to last season's finale. However, there's still some good things in the episode that make it watchable to the end. The characterization of the main six has a really good tune to it. They each have a shining moment in the episode, which helps them feel more involved in the story. Applejack gets a really great moment of heroism as well as snarky sarcasm. Dash is a clever trickster who pulls off a really funny cheap shot at the dragons. Fluttershy teams up with Cattail to assist the bayou animals with a well thought out plan. Rarity uses her artistic skills to breathe life back into Miss Maine's old village. And Pinkie has a lot of good jokes. Jokes that tie into the story and have an enjoyably goofy way of bouncing off the other characters. Even some of the interactions they have with the Pillars have some interesting and even humorous bits of dialogue. They also have a really good moment of showing support for Twilight, getting Starswirl to acknowledge her skill and potential as Celestia's pupil. Spike also plays a good background role as an outsider in the situation, trying to cope with the wacky behavior of the others while rolling his eyes at them. The animation on the Shadow Pony has a creative motion to it too. It has a design seeping of blackness and hollow feeling, like you really think this is how the character would look like. The color choices also stand out, making his presence much more beaming and intimidating. The scene where he's unsealed also has a lot of detailed frames put into it. It's crafted really smoothly like it was actually traditionally animated. The Rainbow Rocks tie-in is also a welcome acknowledgement of previous events, and it's tied into the episode in a way that fits both the movie and the backstory that's being established. And I will say that the episode did have some advantages over the movie. The episode focuses on characters who were previously established in the show itself, so we get a good idea of who they are without having to see supplementary material, leading to less confusion. And because each of the main six are more involved in the story, their presence is elevated from wasted screen time like what happened to Applejack and Fluttershy. Finally, I really like this subtle message that they go for at the end. We see Starswirl, the Royal Sisters, Twilight, and Starlight together in one room. and the dialogue cleverly segues into a hidden meaning that actually becomes more noticeable when you think about it. Celestia asks Starswirl to share his knowledge with a new generation, then Starswirl suggests that the knowledge be passed on by someone Celestia helped raise, then Twilight turns to Starlight saying that she taught her something in a way that acknowledges how they both ended up teaching something to each other, and it all feels connected into something important: the lineage of student and teacher roles and how they're passed on to the next generation and beyond. We basically start off as students, but we can grow and become better through the help of our teachers, and can even turn out to teach something to our predecessors. And just like they did for us, we can pass down what we've learned to someone else, and they just might end up teaching us something one day. That's a really nice message to send and think about, and I have to admit the episode delivers this message in a way that's meaningful. Does that make up for Shadowplay's flaws? Well, no, it's still a pretty mediocre episode overall, but it did have redeeming qualities that kept it from being bad, which is more than I can say for a lot of other episodes. It still feels hollow as an epic season finale, but it still closes on an interesting note, making me wonder how exactly Starswirl's return will fit into the series, and what kind of ideas for stories can be done with the pillars. I guess with all that in mind, I would consider seeing the episode again sometime, but it's not nearly interesting enough for another watch anytime soon. So with all that said, I have to admit that Season 7 was a pretty interesting season. Considering how in the middle Season 6 was, this one turned up several much more interesting episodes. Not all of them were good, but there was certainly a lot more good than bad, and some of them even turn up as some of the best in the whole show. It's really fascinating that after all this time, the show still manages to hold on to a consistent quality, and it's got me looking forward to what we have in store in Season 8, even if we might be getting spoiled by Hasbro. But that's a topic for another video. I hope you enjoyed this season of reviews, and I hope you enjoyed this season as much as I did. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm finally gonna get around to those 2016 movie reviews. MisAnthro Pony, over and out.